Welcome everybody. I'm happy to be here today to present this project in Dallas. And as Amy mentioned, Weston Square is one of the 4 priority parks that Parks for Downtown Dallas is helping develop for the city. And here you can see on the map where each one of those parks is located, with Weston Square highlighted here. Weston Square is located in the Western District of Dallas, which is a historic district for those that are not very familiar with the space. And the square itself is very strategically located within a network of very strong attractions around Dallas. We have a number of touristic attractions highlighted here in blue that include Daily Plaza, Founders Plaza, the newly opened Holocaust Museum, and the Dallas Aquarium. But it's also located in a very key location related to the Convention Center and to the American Airlines Center. So as we started looking at the square, we felt this was both a project that deserved an approach from a neighborhood level to be a neighborhood park, but also one that kind of spoke to Dallas as a city at large, and one that could become a destination along these different numbers of key places in Dallas that are distinctive to many visitors from outside. The site itself, it's quite small. It's 3/4 of an acre. It's located here in this orange rectangle. It's surrounded by 3 streets, Market Street, Corbin Street, and North Record Street, and then bound on the north side by a building currently housing the Spaghetti Warehouse restaurant with a facade with no entries to the park itself. And within the Western Historic District, one thing that's very distinctive about this whole area, in contrast to perhaps downtown Dallas, is this kind of quality of urban design where you have small city blocks, you have a lot of brick buildings of low scale, and areas that feel quite intimate in themselves when you are walking from downtown headed here. This is the site right now and the current parking lot. And that was something that really attracted us when we started thinking of the project. How can we really carry that unique character of the West End into the Western Square and really speak about the history of the site, its unique qualities, and how they speak to Dallas at large? But another thing that was really interesting to us is that the West End Historic District has been rebranded as the West End Innovation District. And there's a lot of companies, mostly tech companies, that are starting to settle in this area, make their headquarters here, and it's becoming a new, it has a new energy of innovation, of young entrepreneur companies, of young people moving in and creating a new character for the space. So as we started looking at those two things, history and innovation, we wanted to create a space that really spoke to both of those concepts. How can we make a space that feels like it's part of the West End? It doesn't stand out, but it complements its very unique historic architecture, but a place that also speaks about innovation and what innovation means in a public space. So in creating the Western Square, we started toying with the idea of creating a smart square. And what does the word smart actually mean in the context of a public space? How is it smart? And as we started toying with this idea, we came across this diagram, which is very interesting. It speaks about the process of designing the Freedom Tower, and the process from when the architect was selected to the point where construction started and the tower actually opened to the public. In that time period, the first iPhone was released, and iPhone went up to 6 generations later to iPhone 6. Now we are on iPhone 11. So when we encountered that, we suddenly had a big question. What does technology do for a public space, and how can technology be incorporated into the built environment to serve a positive influence into the project, but not become a huge investment into something that could become obsolete? So as we started questioning the idea of smart, we started coming up with a series of topics. Smart shouldn't just be about technology. It should be about facilitating operations and maintenance. It should be about creating infrastructure for flexibility for both events and growth over time. It should be about selecting materials that are good for the environment, that minimize heat gain, that can be made of recycled sources. But it's also about creating social spaces and how the role of technology can actually influence the social environment and create a different kind of amenity and a different kind of space within today's world. So we named it the Smart Experience. How can we ensure that these interests in creating an innovative space that spoke to the West End Innovation District created a smart experience for all of its users? And we came up with this diagram that we thought was very helpful for us, for Parks for Downtown Dallas, for the Parks Department to start understanding what this meant. And it's a diagram that basically establishes that all of these different technologies and different aspects of a project kind of come together, both in helping maintenance and operations, but also in creating a social space. If we were to take one of these examples, for example, Wi-Fi, the introduction of Wi-Fi in a public space can facilitate a lot of maintenance. It can operate a smart lighting system that minimizes use of energy, that tells the park department when a light bulb is out and they can come and replace it. But Wi-Fi can also become a social amenity in itself. It can allow some of the people around the West End that work in these innovation companies, it can allow them to bring their work outside, and it can become a new kind of program for an area like West End Square. So as we were thinking of how to really balance these two ideas, the idea of technology, the idea of innovation, with the idea of really just creating a neighborhood park, we came up with a very simple scheme composed of two primary spaces. The technology armature, which is basically a shade trellis that surrounds three edges of the site, and in the interior, a lush garden, so that we can both have this idea of innovation, progression over time, but also provide something that the public really needed, a garden within a very harsh, very urban, very paved environment. So this is an axonometric of the project. Here we have North Record Street on the top, Corbin Street on the bottom, and Market Street on the side. And the idea is that this trellis basically anchors three edges of the site, creating different kinds of environments and different kinds of social spaces underneath, each one responding to what's coming adjacent to it. And in the center, we have this lush garden with a lot of shade trees and undulating planting beds that really bring in that sense of respite to the West End. If we see along the plan, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through a series of perspectives so you can see how each one of the edges of the trellis is programmed in different ways, and also then how the garden works out with a central water feature. But the primary idea was that the trellis would really bound the edges of the site. It would be as long as the building behind it, and really would make it feel like an integral part of the grid of the West End. So these are the gardens. The gardens are planted with native and adapted species inspired in the Texas Blackland Prairie. And the series of undulating planting beds basically create a number of different sitting nooks with curvilinear benches of different scales. So we can encourage social interaction of small groups, more individual relationships, or more larger gathering spaces. Along the west side of the trellis, we have what we call the porch. This is an area that's fronting a residential building. So we wanted this to feel like a space where people could actually come outside, be a neighborhood space where one could sit underneath the shade of the trellis and swing around in these porch benches and be part of the neighborhood itself, bring the neighborhood out. Along the north side, we basically are locating a series of movable tables and chairs facing a lawn that can become a flexible space for potential programming in the future. We envision you could hang a projection screen on the trellis, and this could become a great place for movie night. Next to this area, we have the outdoor workroom, and this is outfitted with a 50-foot-long table that will have a Wi-Fi connection. It will have a series of outlets and wireless chargers, so that the people that are working on the West End, which is our other audience beyond the residents, can actually bring their work outside and start encouraging that idea of the flexible work environment as potentially an activator for public space. And then lastly, facing Market Street, we have a flexible area under the trellis, fronted by a bank of sitting steps, where we envision we could have programs that activate the space. We could have salsa night on one particular time, but we also are calling it the Innovation Arcade, with the idea that this space can become an exhibitor of new technologies that are being developed in Dallas, working through them as almost like artwork. We're working with Amy right now to commission the first piece of artwork, but the idea is that this space over time exhibits a number of different interactive installations that can speak to the different innovations that are being created in this area as well as in Texas at large. So that's kind of an overview of the project, and I wanted to speak a little bit in more detail about the design details that really conceive these two spaces and how this contrast between the built environment and technology can offset then what is purely a garden and a place of respite for the West End. And one of the things we wanted to do with the trellis is really conceive of it as an armature that would hold all the technologies that we are installing on day one, but also a potential for plug and play of technologies that as the park grows, as its uses change or needs change, the trellis could become a place where new ideas, new technologies, new maintenance regimes can be installed on. So going back to our original diagram of what are the things that could make a public space smart, we wanted to incorporate all of these items into the trellis itself. And how we did it is we conceived of the trellis as composed of just simple I-beams, off-the-shelf I-beams. They compose the columns of the trellis as well as the horizontal beams. And the idea with these is that they actually become raceways for all of the conduits that will operate all of the technologies of the project. They will combine conduits that already carry electricity and fiber, but also empty conduits that allow the project to evolve and grow over time, as well as a large number of outlets to provide flexibility for programming and different uses as the space matures. One side of the trellis will have tall, 20-foot tall mast with a cantilevering canopy that becomes very welcoming from the edges. And the side that's fronting the building is more of a standard post and beam structure with fans that will create a cooler environment for more stationary programs. Here you can see how all of these then technologies are being integrated on the trellis. The masts themselves become the main vehicle for all of the systems that operate the park. The main light fixtures that illuminate the garden are installed on the masts. The light fixtures are operated with motion sensors that allow the brightness to be adjusted depending on the use of the park. When the park is open, it will have bright lights. But as it becomes closed or after hours, the lights dim down to be respectful of the residential neighborhood to save energy. However, the motion sensors will pick up any movement that happens penetrating the site and brings the lights back up, also forming a security system. Also on the mast, we have our weather sensors that will operate a smart irrigation system that will self-calibrate depending on the environment, and also a smart sensor for our water feature that will change its modes depending also on how wind affects the site or heat. Also attached to the mast, we would then have sconces that illuminate the bottom of the trellis and the top, and a series of outlets to provide flexibility for programming. In a similar sense, the area of the trellis that's fronting the building, or with the more traditional post and beam structure, would also carry a series of all of these technologies, as well as ceiling fans that will be calibrated to the heat in Dallas to make sure that the space can be used all year round. In addition, we are designing a series of custom furniture that would also have Wi-Fi antennas. They will have wireless chargers, are actually made from a company right in the West End district to further exacerbate this idea of really showing the technology, and with overall outlets so that workers from the area can actually come outside and work. And here's just some axonometrics showing all of the different technologies that are incorporated on the table itself. But at the same time, as we're looking at all of that technology, we also wanted to make sure that the space in the end was a garden. It's a space of respite, and it's the thing that we heard the most from the community as we were designing the West End Square. So we also took very careful attention as to the selection of all of the planting species for the site. For trees, we have 4 primary species that will provide deep shade. We have bur oaks, chinkaping oaks, cedar elms, and shantung maples. And Mexican sycamores. And then we will also have a series of trees that provide more flowering and more smaller structural effects, such as the Mexican plums, the red buds, desert willows, and crepe myrtles. And the idea with the planting plan is that the sidewalks are lined with cedar elms, which is the most prominent street tree on the West Elm. So the space feels one with this context. In the center, we're alternating bur oaks and chinkaping oaks of different sizes to create a more kind of natural effect on the site. We have a large specimen tree of a maple in the center where we feel that in the fall this will create a great spectacle when the leaves change color. And then we have a grove of Mexican sycamores that line a water fissure in the center. Each one of the entries to the site is punctuated by a different flowering tree that will become both a wayfinding device and also kind of an icon as these trees flower in the spring. And then the understory has been a careful selection of native species or adaptive species to make sure that we're not only speaking to the nature around Dallas, but that there are also species that minimize water use and are very good for this climate. As you may or may not hear from future presenters, downtown Dallas has grown enormously without a lot of public space. And one of the main issues with these spaces is that they're so highly used, they get abused. And one of those main abusers are dogs. So through the design of the planting, we're also trying to make sure that we're very smart about how we handle these things that affect the maintenance of a park. And one of the things that we've been working with is how do we design planting beds so that at the edges we minimize any intrusion on the planting beds, any ideas of creating desired lines or placing dogs into the flower beds, by locating some of our more robust species at the edges and allowing the more delicate species to be in the interior of the garden. Similarly, placing benches that create those edges and large plantings against the more delicate interior. And lining the streets with raised planters so that they also become a protector for our street trees and plantings against the urban abuse. Lastly, within the garden, we're locating a water feature, working closely with GPSI here from Dallas on its design. And the water feature also looks to permeate this idea of being smart and reactive to the environment. So the feature is designed to have 3 modes. The first one is to be a reflecting pool on a very on a day that has not a lot of wind. It will just be a reflecting pool that reflects the sky and the Mexican sycamore trees around it, with a water table that comes over the edge and also a shallow area where one can walk in between. When the wind sensor installed on our trellis picks up wind, the water feature will turn on a series of nozzles that will create a water noise and will create a cooling effect. And also on very hot days, the water feature will also turn on a potable water fog that will inundate the garden with a cloud to cool down everybody that's walking throughout. So with that, here we see an example of the water feature rendering on a still day, and then that idea of the fog cloud that inundates the garden and creates a cooling effect. So that's the conclusion of the presentation, just trying to show a little bit of how we've been working with Parks for Downtown Dallas and the Park Department to really create a space that speaks to its context, it speaks to its neighborhood, to its immediate users, the residents of the West End and the people that work on the West End, but also speaks to Dallas at large and how Dallas is becoming a city of innovation, a city of creativity, and how can we start bringing these things into the public space, not just in their traditional sense of alleviating maintenance and operations, as many smart systems are used, but also as an amenity itself for the public that facilitates new uses, facilitates perhaps using the space on a very hot day, and creates a new kind of public space for downtown. Thank you.